All right, so Han Kang, huh? You want to try and get to the heart of what makes her work tick.
It's a great challenge you've brought us, but we've got a good amount to work with here. Her biography, the context around this prize she just won, even a bibliography that crosses languages. Pretty impressive, right?
Definitely ambitious. But that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. You don't want to just skim the surface. We're really trying to understand what makes Han Kang's work so captivating.
And what's key for me is that you're recognizing we can't separate the work from the artist herself. To really get Han Kang, you have to start with understanding her.
You've challenged us to go beyond just prize-winning author and really paint a picture of this artist. So where do we even begin with a portrait like that?
Well, every story has a beginning, and for her, it's Gwangju, South Korea. That's where she was born back in 1970.
Okay, so we're picturing this bustling city, steeped in history and culture. I imagine that leaves a mark on you even early on.
It certainly does. But then there's another layer to it. When she was 9, her family relocates to Seoul about a shift. Imagine that at such a crucial age, those contrasting landscapes must have had a profound impact.
It's not just the cities themselves, though, right?
Yeah.
Her own father was a novelist. That's not just a career choice, it's practically in your blood.
What was it you said about understanding the artist?
Exactly. It's woven into the fabric of her childhood.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate that kind of influence, having stories at the core of your upbringing.
It makes you wonder if she ever had a chance to be anything but a storyteller.
And yet, here's the thing about Han Kang. She's not just a writer. Music art, these are deeply embedded in her journey, too. It's all connected, you see.
Yeah, there were a few mentions of that in the bio. But it can't just be a fun fact. How does it actually manifest in her writing?
Think of it like this. Her writing, that's the music. But the art, the emotion, it's all woven through it, adding these layers of depth and texture. To truly appreciate her work, you have to consider this multifaceted approach. It's key. So we've got all these influences swirling around her, these cities, this artistic legacy. When does Han Kang actually put pen to paper? When does she start writing?
You know, it's interesting how often this pattern emerges with literary greats, but her entry point, like so many others, was poetry.
Really?
Yeah, her early work appeared in a magazine called Literature and Society. We're talking early 1990s.
I was fascinated by that.
Mm-hmm.
So many authors start with poetry. It's like this pure distillation of language, almost like honing the craft in its most essential form. Do those early poems give us any hints of what she'd go on to explore in her later work?
Absolutely. There's a lyrical sensibility there, the precision with languages that she becomes known for in her prose. But it wasn't long before she transitioned into longer-form narratives. In 1995, she publishes Love of Yosu, a collection of short stories.
Ooh, going straight on the tree list. I always find it so rewarding to go back and see those early works, those first forays into what would become their signature style.
It's like tracing the roots of a tree back to the seed, right? So we've got Love of Yosu, but let's jump ahead a few years, 1995 to 2002. This is when Your Cold Hands comes out. Now, this novel is particularly interesting because it directly connects with her background in the visual arts. It centers on a sculptor who becomes obsessed with making plaster casts of bodies.
It's almost like foreshadowing, isn't it? This connection between the body and art that we see emerge more fully in her later work. Even that line you pulled out earlier, life is a sheet arching over an abyss. There's a real sense of the body in that, the fragility of existence.
Precisely. And that's what's so compelling about Your Cold Hands. It's not simply about the artistic process itself. It delves into those deeper questions of what it means to exist in a body, the relationship between the physical and the psychological, that sense of precariousness, of hidden depths. It becomes a recurring theme throughout her work.
So from those early works, how do we get to the Han Kang who becomes this global literary figure? There has to be a turning point somewhere, a moment where things shift.
I think it's undeniable that the turning point is her 2007 novel, The Vegetarian. This is the book that really launched her onto the international stage, and with good reason.
I've heard it described as being about so much more than just a dietary choice. What is it about The Vegetarian that makes it so captivating?
Well, the title is interesting, isn't it? It's almost deceptively simple, but at its core, the act of vegetarianism for the protagonist, Young Hai, it becomes this incredibly potent form of rebellion against societal expectations, and the consequences of that rebellion are intense, to say the least.
Intense. How?
Well, she's grappling with a controlling father, a husband who just doesn't understand her choices, and then there's the whole unsettling dynamic with her brother-in-law.
He's the video artist, right? The one who becomes fixated on Young Hai.
Exactly. And that fixation on her body, on this perceived purity, it becomes almost grotesque. It speaks to those broader themes of how women are viewed, how they're objectified often for simply trying to assert their own agency.
Wow. It sounds like The Vegetarian touches on so many raw nerves, family dynamics, societal pressures, the very nature of choice. No wonder it resonated so widely.
And running through it all, you see this recurring image of flaming trees, this potent symbol of the natural world as both alluring and destructive. It's an image that stays with you.
You know, it's interesting. You use the word intense to describe the fallout from Young Hai's decision in The Vegetarian. And that same word keeps coming back to me as we talk about her work. There's this exploration of what it means to exist in a body, in a family, in a society that's constantly imposing expectations. And it's not always pretty.
It's visceral, isn't it? And crucially, it's not surface level. This isn't just about the drama of these situations. Han Kang is tapping into something much deeper, something rooted in Eastern thought. This idea of suffering as an inherent part of the human condition.
Right? It's not that she shies away from pain at all, but it's almost like she gives it a physical form. Like it becomes a character in itself, which actually reminds me of what you were saying earlier about the way the physical and mental anguish are so intertwined in her work. Are there other novels that really exemplify that?
Convalescence would be a good example. Published in 2013, it centers on a woman who's dealing with this chronic leg ulcer. But that physical wound, it becomes a metaphor. A way for Han Kang to explore the woman's fractured relationships, particularly with her deceased sister.
So the body becomes this vessel for these larger, more internal struggles.
Exactly. And it's often within those struggles that we see Han Kang exploring the weight of silence.
You mean like with Young Hai's refusal to speak in The Vegetarian?
Precisely. It becomes an act of defiance, a way of reclaiming agency in a world that can feel incredibly suffocating. And the thing about silence in her work is that it's not just the absence of words, it's about what those silences reveal, the questions they force us to confront. Like in her short story, Europa, there's this line, "If you were able to live as you desire, what would you do with your life?" And the silence surrounding that question, it speaks volumes about our own search for meaning, our longing for authenticity.
It's like she's inviting us to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, rather than trying to impose easy answers.
Right.
And nowhere is that confrontation with discomfort more palpable than Human Acts.
Right. Her 2014 novel that grapples with the Gwangju massacre, an incredibly harrowing event. And of course, having grown up in Gwangju, that trauma had a personal resonance for Han Kang.
It must have been so challenging to delve into such a dark chapter of history.
It's a tough read, for sure, but essential. And she doesn't shy away from the brutality, the rawness of it all. One of the most striking things about that book is how she gives voice to the dead, allowing them to witness their own deaths.
Wow, it's like this incredibly haunting and powerful way of giving voice to those silenced by tragedy. It makes you think about how often we try to avoid confronting those difficult emotions, those dark corners of history. But she forces us to look at them head on. And she does it in such different ways, too. I mean, you've got Human Acts, and then you have something like The White Book from 2016, which feels like a completely different beast altogether.
Absolutely. Human Acts is visceral. It's immediate. Whereas The White Book, it's almost meditative.
Yeah.
It's poetic. Is Han Kang's very personal response to the death of her older sister who died in infancy. And it's interesting because people sometimes miscategorize it as a novel, but it's much closer to an extended elegy, a meditation on grief and absence told through the lens of white objects, milk, snow, rice paper.
It's incredible how she moves between these different modes of storytelling, these different emotional registers. And yet there's always this undeniable thread connecting them back to those core themes. Pain, silence, this search for meaning.
And that thread continues in her more recent work, too, like We Do Not Part from 2021. There are definitely thematic similarities to The White Book, but this time the focus shifts to the shared trauma of the Jeju Island Massacre, another incredibly dark period in South Korea's history. And once again, we see how art becomes this way for the characters to grapple with the unspeakable, to heal, to remember.
So as we try to synthesize all of this, what do you think Han Kang's legacy will be? Why does this prize, this recognition in 2024 matter? Not just for her, but for literature as a whole.
You know, I think what strikes me most about Han Kang's work is its universality. It transcends cultural and linguistic boundaries. She tackles these huge universal themes: pain loss, the search for meaning, and she does it with such raw honesty, such incredible precision of language. This prize is a testament to the power of her voice, and it's a reminder that even in the face of immense suffering, there's beauty, there's hope, there's the possibility for connection and understanding.
It really makes you wonder what other stories, what other voices are out there waiting to be heard? How many more Han Kangs are there just waiting to be discovered? It's been a truly remarkable deep dive. Thank you for guiding us through it.
It's been my pleasure.